You probably know that landscape architects work with plants. We do and we love it, but we use them in really interesting ways that you may not have realized. And we do so much more than pick out plants. In this podcast series, we invite professionals in our field to talk about what excites them about the profession of landscape architecture and the wide variety of things they do. We will explore the many ways that landscape architects positively impact the world. Landscape architecture is a diverse practice that shapes the way we experience and move through our cities and communities, guides our responses to climate and environmental changes, brings forward our public histories, and so much more. We at the University of Colorado Denver Department of Landscape Architecture are excited that you are interested in our field. Please join us as we discover what many people don't know about landscape architecture.
Tina Bishop is a principal landscape architect and founding partner at Mundus Bishop. With more than 40 years of experience planning and designing public spaces, Tina has shaped projects from across the country that engage, inspire, and enrich the communities they serve. She holds an undergraduate degree from Colorado State University and a graduate degree from University of Colorado Denver, and has contributed to the profession through juries, presentations, and exhibitions. Hi, Tina. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Me too. Okay, let's jump into our questions. Why are you drawn to historic preservation in your work as a landscape architect?
That is such a great question. I guess I'll just share a little bit about how our practice is built, which really brings us back to historic preservation. And we really kind of are built around the idea that every place we work in, each place has a story. And then the people that create that story are important to that narrative. And then, of course, current day people are also important to history. In our practice, we really believe that nature and culture are intertwined, and that within that work, knowing the historic components of that place, history, historic landscape, historic design, really helps us guide our work and our new design. For a long time, I've had an interest in cultural resources, really starting to look early in my career in culture and history and all the work I was doing, all the places that we were working in, even since my early days as a landscape architect. I've always been really intrigued by really how we shape the land as people, how we also interact with the land. And I've been influenced a lot in my career and my work by those that came before, those landscape architects, designers, people who created place, designed parks, spaces, vernacular landscapes, and kind of all those things. What's really great, I think, about thinking of it in terms of historic preservation is really that it puts a name to sort of a way of working. It kind of captures and bookends that idea about learning about a place and its background, really starting to understand and especially learning about, its physical composition, attributes, features. And one thing that we always look for is also that connection to the natural environment. Every place we work, every historic or cultural place we work in has a key tie back to its natural environment. And that's really how we ground our work. It is also sometimes limiting to categorize it as historic preservation, because we do really think of our work a little bit more broadly in working with cultural resources. And in many ways, landscape architects have come to be respected a little bit more in the current day practices around cultural resources and in that realm. It wasn't always really the case between archaeologists and architects, but I think we've really moved forward as a profession in historic preservation. It is essential that we really do know and understand things like the Secretary of Interior standards, some of the guidelines that are out there that the National Park Service has put out related to cultural landscape reports. So those are really some of the attributes and things that I think about and how I think of historic preservation.
Is there one historically or culturally important site that you've been able to work on that really stands out to you as special?
So I like this question too. So many spots. So I really think of it in terms of maybe 4 different types of places that might exemplify the range of work that I've had or our firm has had to work on in cultural landscapes, where landscape architects are really leaders in this practice of understanding this place. And A big one, a good example would be Alcatraz Island, National Historic Landmark. For decades, it had varied uses, mainly for incarceration, but it also has a lot of the vestiges of all that history. One of the interesting things about Alcatraz and revealing sort of its history is that between 1969 and 1970, it was a site of what's now known historically as the Indian occupation. It was a big, important event that led to future understanding about the indigenous peoples' movements across the country. So it's really kind of important. That's one kind of type of landscape that really stands out. Locally, we had the privilege of working on Bobby Park, which is kind of in South Denver. This is a really good example of bringing forward another's narrative from another designer. It was originally designed by Satura Nishida. He was in Lawrence Halpern's office in the late 1970s and early 1980s, and designed the fundamental of the park, the monuments, the commemorative moments. We designed the setting that was completed in 2010 that really grounded that in a story and a narrative in a restored shortgrass prairie. Again, we completed that in 2010, and this year we just were awarded, or Bobby R was awarded, a landmark award by ASLA Colorado, Wyoming. Another good example kind of cultural resource work that landscape architects are doing, and we're doing as well, is sites like Sitka Park National Historic Park in Alaska. It's the location for the Kiksati Fort site on Sitka Sound and the Catashine River. This place is the site of like two battles between the native Tlingit people and warriors that were on their side. It was a battle between them and the Russian American Company and Russian Army, where the Tlingit were actually defeated, which led to the Russians occupying this area, Sitka, and of course moving that story forward eventually for Alaska and Sitka, of course, to become part of the United States. Lastly, but also really important across the country are our large and sometimes small too, historic urban parks. That's kind of a bigger category. A lot of these parks, we've done several in Denver master plans and improvements for places like Cheeseman Park and City Park, and we're currently working in Salt Lake City on some of their oldest and most notable historic urban parks. What's really fascinating about preservation and cultural landscapes in that regard is this use of contemporary needs and components, but also many of these parks are facing similar challenges. A biggie is really the maturing historic urban tree canopies. And not only are they, important trees, but they really create space. They line roads, and we're seeing them really facing catastrophic losses over the next coming years. So those are kind of more, not just one, I would say, place that's really been resonating, but also really kind of category of spaces that are really important.
What is the most intriguing thing that you've learned about a place in doing research for a project? And how did you bring that thing forward to the future of users and the site?
I would say, again, there's so many, one of the great things about doing historic landscape work is a lot of it is field work. We are able to look at historic maps and drawings and go into the field. And when you have that information in hand, it's really amazing to go and to find the things that may not be really, really evident to maybe others that aren't trained in the same way. We're always looking for the ephemeral features that reveal use, occupancy. Oftentimes they reveal lost design features. Going back to my example of Alcatraz Island, it's a historic landscape grounded in its maritime environment, but that's a really harsh environment, and it does take a lot of the concrete. It kind of spalls and ruins it over time. And then actions of different folks that have been on the island. A big action in the the early 1970s was when the GSA demolished a big portion of the island after the Indian occupation for many reasons. And those have now become kind of spaces to explore from a historic design landscape to really reveal what had been there and to remind kind of everyone, some of those actions that had happened. One of an interesting piece that we've been working on in our office is we do quite a bit of work in cultural resources for the National Park Service, and have found that we all, I think, across the country understand and probably know who the Civilian Conservation Corps is, but we have less knowledge and we celebrate a little bit less those landscape architects from the early 1900s through the 1940s that really created those landscapes and designed them. A lot of the work that we see came out of a real small division with, people's names like Thomas Vint and John Waskey, that was his name, who really created that rustic naturalistic design we associate with our national parks. We really do also, what I find intriguing are the continuums of history across many of the sites that we look at. I mentioned Sitka National Historic Park already. There's a layer that has been placed on top of the battlefield from the 1804 battle that really talks more about the 1900s. And if you've been there, if you visited it, it's really well known for its totem carvings by the Haida people, who were not the Tlingits who had lived there. And they were more of a later addition to bring more of a celebration and recognition to that site. And that layer too is now currently celebrated. So it's really important to also see that in historic landscapes and the way that we think about our work is they're not stagnant, they're dynamic, and they're always something else that's been changing them that might also be important.
Well, Tina, it was great chatting with you today. Thanks so much for spending time with us and answering our questions.
Well, you were welcome. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to our podcast, Something Else About Landscape Architecture. The Department of Landscape Architecture at the University of Colorado, Denver offers multiple paths of study to fit your career aspirations. We invite you to visit our website, ucdenver.edu/landscape, or follow us on Instagram at CU Denver Landscape Arch.